All right, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to age a photograph using a few adjustment layers and a couple of additional layers and filters. It's really easy, highly customizable. It looks just like this, and you can amaze your friends. All right, let's go check it out. Here we go. All right, we're going to start with this image from a vacation I took a couple years ago in Barcelona. It was kind of an overcast day, so the sky's kind of washed out, so it's perfect for this effect. You could really use any image with this. It doesn't really matter because everything that we're going to be doing to it is essentially going to be destroying what the image looks like. We're going to start off in the layers panel. I'm going to create an adjustment layer, a curves adjustment layer. And with the curves adjustment, what I'm going to do is change the three component channel properties. I'm going to go to the red channel first. Typically in old photographs, what happens is the red dye tends to bleed a little bit. So the images tend to have a little bit more of a red cast to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a point on this curve and increase the red throughout the image. So all the faces are a little bit more red. The greens are starting to get a little washed out. So that's going to begin affecting this image and making it look like an older photograph. Now the green channel, I'm going to increase the contrast in here, and I'm just going to make the curve pretty steep. Well, not really steep, but a certain level of steepness, just so as if some of the subtleties of this image have been knocked out over time. So something like that will do. Now, a lot of this is really to your eye, so what's going to look best? That does not look good. So something really steep like that will work. Finally, in the blue channel, blue tends to be a fairly unstable dye. So what happens over time is the blues tend to diminish. So I'm going to make this curve a little flatter. So I'm going to take this curve and make it less steep than it was. And now you can start to see that the blue is starting to go away a little bit. Now, if you want to bring a little bit back into the sky so it doesn't feel so green, you could certainly use this tool here that allows you to select and target an area and place a point on that and maybe raise it up a little bit. And that, you could see that was right on the edge of the curve, so that's just adjusting that ever so slightly. Now the other thing that's happening with this image is that it still has the brightness and it still has the contrast from the original photograph, but we want to make this look like it's been aged like 40 years or so. So we're going to achieve that by going into the layers panel again and making a levels adjustment. And we're going to use the output levels this time to limit the darkness by bringing the black output level towards the center, maybe around level 30, level 40. It really depends on your image. Now you can take away some of those intense darks and begin to flatten out the contrast in here a little bit. You could certainly shift gamma if you want, just to kind of lighten or darken it again to your eye. Now these are all adjustment layers, meaning that if you wanted to go back into curves and you decided that, oh, maybe the red I want to have like a little bit more reds throughout, I want to make this feel a little washed out, you could certainly do that. So these are two adjustments. Just doing these have made this image look pretty dated. But it's fairly uniform, so we want to kind of mess this up a little bit more. And one way that we can do that is by applying the cloud filter to a layer, but using not black and white, using some warmer colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. It's going to sit on top of my levels and curves adjustment layer. I'm going to change my foreground color to this orangey color. Now these are fairly arbitrary. I'm using these colors because they're going to warm this up a little bit, but if you wanted to cool things down, by all means, you could use different colors. But I'm going to start off with my foreground being this orange color. The hexadecimal code is FC940D. So I'll make that the foreground color, and my background color is a yellow, more of a lemony yellow color, FA-F336. So something like in this range is perfectly fine. Then what I'm going to do on my new layer with these two new colors, I'm going to go to the filter menu, render, and I'm going to render clouds. And what that does is it's taken the foreground and background colors and has now created these procedural clouds on this layer. But of course it's blocking out everything behind it. So what I want to do now is change the blend mode from normal down to overlay. And now you can see that, okay, that's really starting to mess with the color. Now this is at 100%, so let's drop that down significantly. So if we get to about 30-35%, now things are starting to look pretty interesting and really dated. I like this around 25%, seems really good to me. Another thing that I want to do is I want to place kind of some dirt and scratches on here. Now that's something that I can't do from one of my filters. There's not a dirt and scratches filter. There's one to clean them up, but there's not one to apply them. So what I've done is I've found some grunge textures that I'm going to use. And I'll put a link to it in this video. But you can also go online and just type in grunge textures to find them, or you could go to a website like Unsplash, and I typed in grunge textures, and really what you want is a texture that has some subtle kind of lights and darks in it. And you can download these. These are all tend to be high resolution, and you could use them. You could, of course, scan something if you wanted to try that. So any of these might work for our purposes, but like I said, I have one I can link to that we're gonna place in here. For this, what I'm going to do is go to the File menu, and I'm going to place Embedded. And depending on wherever you have your grunge texture, I'm going to just place it in here. I'm going to scale this up fairly large. You can see there's lots of noise and dirt in here. If you want to change the direction of this, by all means you can. And I'm going to double click. And of course I can't see anything because the blend mode is set to normal at 100% opacity. So this one, we're also going to set this down to overlay or soft light. You can see how it's beginning to blend in. All the whites and highlights are making things brighter. Anything that's kind of darker than 50% gray, we can still see. But now if I change the opacity down to something like 20-25%, it's not that obvious what's happening, but it's adding, whoops, that's down to 0. It's not that obvious what's happening, but it's lightening things up a little bit, and it's adding kind of a variation in texture. Now you could certainly play around with it. If you wanted to try multiply, you could do that, but just you're going to have to change this texture down even lower if you want. So that might work for your purposes. I feel like the grays tend to get a little too kind of gray in the background for me, so I like to do soft light or overlay with this texture. And just make it just till it's apparent enough. Where you're starting to see it, you see some noise in it. It looks like it's been through the ringer. Now the last thing that I want to do to this is I want to give it a kind of a vignetting effect. Like the edges are a little bit darker and the center is a little bit brighter. And so what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to go and create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to do this as a gradient. I'm going to choose the black to white gradient. And instead of it being the linear gradient, I want that to be a radial gradient. And I want black to be in the middle, and I want white to be at the edges. And I'm going to scale this up as well, because I don't want it to be such a harsh dot in the middle. I want just to be some warming up on the edges. So something, this is going to depend on the size of your original image. Mine tends to be pretty large. So I made this about 150 to 200%, something like that. Because it's an adjustment layer, you can change it after the fact, which is pretty awesome. Going to click on OK. Going to make my blending mode screen. So with screen, what's going to happen is the black is not going to have an effect, but the white will have an effect. At 100%, it's pretty intense, so I'm going to drop this down considerably as well. And now you can see that there's the center is a little bit brighter than the edges. And again, because this is an adjustment layer, you can go back in and say, well, maybe I want my edges to be darker and the center to be lighter. Well, I can reverse that and change the blending mode to say multiply. Although I like the screen one better. So I'm going to leave it at screen and I'm going to leave this unreversed. But you can go in and change the scale if you wanted to be a little bit less, a little bit more light around the edges. Right? So all of this stuff you can go back in and change. So if you want to move your grunge texture around, you can do that. If you want to replace it with a different one, you could do that. If you wanted different colors for your clouds, you could make those. You could go into your levels and continue your adjustments with that or the curves to make this look like an aged photo. And so that's it for how to make an aged photo. I hope you'd enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe and like, and we'll see you in the next video.